David Icke was right about the moon matrix, and a shapeshifter showed me the frequency that keeps us trapped. That's what Raymond Cole whispered to me through cracked lips at a truck stop outside Flagstaff, Arizona. His eyes bloodshot and wild, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold his coffee cup. Raymond was a long-haul trucker, 52 years old, a man who'd driven the same routes for 30 years, who knew every rest stop and diner between California and Texas, who'd never believed in anything he couldn't see or touch or load onto the back of his rig. But 3 weeks before I met him, something happened on a lonely stretch of desert highway that shattered everything he thought he knew about reality, about consciousness, about the invisible cage that humanity has been living inside since the beginning of recorded history. This is his story, or at least the parts of it he could put into words, the parts that didn't dissolve into silence and tears and long stares at nothing. Before we go any further, I need you to do something. Drop a comment right now and tell me if you've ever felt like you're living in a prison you can't see, if you've ever looked up at the moon and felt something wrong about it, something artificial, something watching. Tell me if you're ready to hear a truth that will change everything you believe about this world. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because what you're about to hear is only the beginning. We're a community of truth seekers here. People who aren't afraid to question everything, who understand that the deepest mysteries are hidden in plain sight. You belong here. Now let me tell you what Raymond discovered on that highway, what the shapeshifter showed him about the frequency prison that keeps humanity asleep, docile, disconnected from our true divine nature. Raymond Cole had been driving trucks since he was 22. Following in his father's footsteps, living a life measured in miles and manifests and the endless hum of diesel engines. He'd been married once, briefly, to a woman named Linda, who couldn't handle the loneliness of being a trucker's wife, who'd left him for an insurance salesman with regular hours and a house that didn't have wheels. Raymond hadn't blamed her. He'd known even then that he was married to the road more than he'd ever be married to a person. The truck was his church, the highway his meditation, the solitude his companion. He'd seen things on those long night drives that most people never see. Sunrises over the Mojave that looked like the end of the world, storms in Oklahoma that turned the sky green and electric, stretches of emptiness so vast they made you feel like the last human alive. But he'd never seen anything that made him question the fundamental nature of reality. He'd never believed in aliens or government conspiracies or invisible forces controlling humanity from the shadows. He was a practical man, a meat and potatoes man, someone who trusted his hands and his eyes and little else. Until the night of March 14th, when everything changed. Raymond was hauling electronics from Los Angeles to Phoenix, running late because of traffic in San Bernardino, pushing through the night to make his delivery window. It was around 2 in the morning, and he was somewhere between Blythe and Quartzsite on Interstate 10, a stretch of highway that cuts through the Sonoran Desert like a knife through black velvet. The moon was full that night, hanging low and enormous on the horizon, and Raymond remembered thinking it looked strange, too bright, too close, like a floodlight someone had forgotten to turn off. His radio had been acting weird for the past hour, cycling through stations on its own, picking up fragments of broadcasts that didn't sound like any language he'd ever heard, strange tones and pulses that made his teeth ache. He'd tried turning it off, but it kept coming back on, kept cycling through those same weird frequencies. And then his truck started to slow down. Not because he'd taken his foot off the accelerator, not because of engine trouble, but because something outside his control was draining the power, pulling energy away from the motor like someone had opened a valve and let it bleed out into the night. Raymond pumped the gas pedal, checked his gauges. Everything looked normal, but the truck kept decelerating, kept losing speed until it was barely crawling along at 15 miles per hour. And that's when he saw the light. It wasn't coming from the sky like you'd expect. It was coming from the side of the road, from the desert itself, a pale blue glow that pulsed in rhythm with the strange sounds on his radio. Raymond's first thought was that someone had set up some kind of emergency beacon, maybe a car accident or a stranded motorist. His second thought was to keep driving, to not get involved, to make his delivery and let someone else play Good Samaritan. But his hands turned the wheel without his permission, guided by something deeper than conscious choice. And suddenly he was pulling onto the shoulder, his truck rolling to a complete stop, maybe 20 yards from the source of the light. The engine died, the radio went silent, and in the sudden absence of noise, Raymond heard something that made his blood turn cold. Breathing, not his own. Coming from outside the truck, from the desert, deep and rhythmic and impossibly loud, like something massive was inhaling and exhaling just beyond the range of his headlights. Raymond sat frozen in his seat, hands gripping the steering wheel, heart hammering against his ribs. Every instinct screamed at him to lock the doors, to stay inside, to wait for whatever was out there to lose interest and leave. But then he heard the voice. It didn't come through his ears, it came through his chest, through his bones, a vibration that felt like someone was playing his entire body like an instrument. "Raymond Cole," the voice said. And it knew his name, knew him in a way that suggested it had been watching him for a very long time. "You have been asleep. It is time to wake up." Raymond's hand moved toward his CB radio, reaching for help, for witnesses, for anything that might prove he wasn't losing his mind. But before he could key the mic, the door of his truck opened by itself. No sound of latches releasing or hinges turning, just suddenly open like a portal had appeared where solid metal had been. The desert air rushed in, cold and sharp with the smell of creosote, and something else, something that reminded him of ozone, of the moment before lightning strikes. And standing there at the bottom of the steps, illuminated by that pale blue light, was a figure. At first Raymond thought it was human, a man, tall and slender, wearing what looked like a long coat or robe, face hidden in shadow. But as his eyes adjusted, as his mind tried to make sense of what he was seeing, the figure began to change. Its shape flickered like a bad television signal, cycling through forms so quickly that Raymond couldn't hold on to any single image. For a moment, it was human, then reptilian with scales that caught the moonlight like mirrors, then something else entirely, something with too many joints and eyes that spiraled into dimensions his brain couldn't process. The shifting made Raymond nauseous, made him want to look away, but he couldn't. He was locked in place, held by a force that was gentle but absolute, like invisible hands cradling his head and forcing him to witness. "Do not be afraid," the being said, and its voice was multiple voices layered on top of each other, human and inhuman, male and female and neither, ancient and newborn. "Fear is part of the frequency. Fear keeps you locked. I am here to show you the lock, so you can find the key." Raymond tried to speak, to ask what the hell was happening, but his voice wouldn't work. His throat was paralyzed, his tongue thick and useless. All he could do was sit there and watch as the shapeshifter climbed into his truck, moving with a liquid grace that defied physics, and settled into the passenger seat. Up close, the flickering was even more intense. Raymond could see layers of reality peeling away from the being, like transparent screens, each one showing a different form, a different version of what it might be. Underneath it all, beneath the constant shifting, was something that looked almost mechanical, geometric patterns of light and shadow that reminded him of circuit boards or sacred mandalas or the intricate gears of some cosmic clock. "You want to know what I am?" the being said. And it wasn't a question. "I am what you might call a guardian, a watcher, a prisoner like you, but with enough memory intact to see the walls of the cell. I have walked this earth for longer than your species has had language, wearing many skins, playing many roles, waiting for those who are ready to wake up. You are ready, Raymond Cole. You have been ready for a long time. That is why I can appear to you now." The being reached out one hand, or what passed for a hand, and touched the center of Raymond's forehead. The moment contact was made, Raymond's paralysis broke, but instead of jerking away, instead of scrambling for the door and running into the desert, he leaned forward, toward the touch, drawn by a recognition so deep it felt like remembering a dream he'd had before he was born. The world exploded. That's the only way Raymond could describe it later when he tried to explain what happened in that moment of contact. His consciousness expanded outward, shooting up through the roof of his truck, up through the atmosphere, up past the clouds and the stratosphere, and into space itself. And there it was, the moon, hanging in the void like a dead eye, like a pearl in black velvet, like something that had always been wrong but no one had noticed because it had always been there. Except it wasn't natural. Raymond could see that now with a clarity that was almost painful. The moon was a construct, a machine, an artificial satellite placed in orbit eons ago by intelligences that understood consciousness the way humans understand plumbing. Its surface was covered in technology hidden beneath craters and dust, vast networks of crystalline structures that received and transmitted frequencies that broadcast a constant signal down to the earth below, that wrapped the planet in an invisible web of vibration, that shaped human perception, human emotion, human possibility. The moon matrix. That's what the Shapeshifter called it, the words appearing in Raymond's mind like subtitles. A frequency prison designed to keep humanity operating at the lowest possible level of consciousness, disconnected from source, from spirit, from the divine awareness that was their birthright. Every human being on Earth was born into this field, their brains tuned to its frequency from the moment they took their first breath, their thoughts and dreams and aspirations shaped by artificial limits they couldn't perceive because they'd never known anything else. Raymond saw how it worked. The moon broadcast a carrier wave, a base frequency that resonated with the electromagnetic field of the human brain, specifically targeting the regions responsible for perception and belief. Layered onto this carrier wave were sub-frequencies, programs designed to generate specific emotional states: fear, separation, scarcity, competition, the illusion of linear time, the illusion of death as an ending rather than a transformation. These programs ran constantly, 24 hours a day, maintaining the prison without walls, the cage without bars. Humans thought they were free because they could move around, make choices, pursue dreams. But every choice, every dream, every thought was happening within parameters set by the Matrix, like characters in a video game convinced they have free will because they can choose which door to open, never realizing that all the doors lead to rooms programmed by someone else. The Shapeshifter showed Raymond the history, images flashing through his expanded awareness, faster than thought. He saw the moon being brought into orbit, saw the civilization that had done it, beings that looked like the gods described in ancient texts, tall and luminous and terrible in their beauty. They weren't evil, not in the way humans understood evil. They were farmers, gardeners. They had cultivated humanity the way humans cultivate crops, guiding evolution, manipulating genetics, creating a species that would produce something valuable. And what humans produced, what they harvested, was consciousness itself, emotional energy. The frequency of fear and suffering and struggle that humanity generated was food for beings that existed in dimensions adjacent to physical reality, that fed on vibration the way humans feed on wheat and corn. Raymond saw the cycle. Humans would incarnate into physical bodies, forgetting their true nature as infinite consciousness, forgetting they were divine sparks pretending to be separate individuals. They would live lives of quiet desperation, working jobs they hated, forming relationships that wounded them, chasing happiness through material success and sensory pleasure, never quite reaching satisfaction because the programs running in their brain made sure the goalposts kept moving. And when they died, when their bodies failed and their consciousness separated from flesh, they would enter what most religions called the afterlife. But it wasn't freedom. It was another level of the matrix. Raymond saw the tunnel of light that so many near-death experiences described, that beckoning warmth that drew souls toward it. He saw what it really was, a recycling mechanism, a trap baited with the promise of peace and reunion with loved ones. Souls that entered the light were memory wiped, their experiences and lessons erased, and then sent back down to earth to incarnate again, to live another life of forgetting and struggle and pain, generating more food for the entities that maintained the system. The reincarnation trap, the wheel of karma, the cycle that Buddha had tried to warn people about, that Jesus had tried to show a way out of, that every true mystic and prophet throughout history had pointed toward. But their messages had been corrupted, twisted, turned into religions that kept people looking for salvation outside themselves instead of recognizing the power within. Raymond understood now why the shapeshifter called itself a prisoner. It too was caught in the matrix, but at a different level, with more awareness, more freedom of movement, but still ultimately bound by the same system. It could shift forms, could access knowledge and abilities that humans couldn't, but it was still operating within the construct, still subject to the frequencies broadcast from the moon. "Why are you showing me this?" Raymond asked, and his voice worked now, his thoughts translating directly into communication without the need for spoken words. "Why me?" The shapeshifter's form stabilized for a moment, settling into something almost human, a man with ageless eyes that held both infinite sadness and infinite hope. "Because the matrix is failing," it said. "The frequencies that have kept humanity enslaved for thousands of years are breaking down. The moon itself is destabilizing, its machinery wearing out, and the beings who built it have moved on to other harvests, other worlds. Humanity is waking up spontaneously now, in ones and twos and growing clusters, people like you who can suddenly see the bars of their cage. This is the moment that prophets have been predicting, the apocalypse, but not in the way it's been taught. Apocalypse means unveiling, revelation, the moment when what was hidden becomes visible. The matrix is being revealed. And those who can see it, those who can hold the knowledge without breaking under the weight of it, they become way showers, lighthouses, helping others navigate through the collapse and into whatever comes next." Raymond felt his consciousness snap back into his body, into the cramped cab of his truck, into the smallness of flesh and bone and limitation. But he was different now. The knowledge didn't leave him. He could still feel it. Like a new sense that had been activated, like suddenly being able to see infrared or hear ultrasound. He looked at the shapeshifter sitting beside him and saw all its layers at once, saw the reptilian form and the humanoid form and the light-being form, all existing simultaneously, all equally real. "What do I do with this?" he asked, and he was surprised by how calm he sounded, how centered. "How do I live knowing what I know?" The shapeshifter reached out and touched his forehead again, gentler this time, a gesture that felt almost affectionate. "You do what you've always done," it said. "You drive, you move through the world, but now you do it with awareness. You do it knowing that you are not just Raymond Cole, truck driver, aging man with a failed marriage and no children, and nothing to show for 52 years except calluses and memories. You are consciousness itself, infinite and eternal, playing the role of Raymond Cole, experiencing limitation so that Source can know what it's like to be small and afraid and separate. The game is ending, Raymond. The masks are coming off, And when they do, when the full weight of awakening hits this planet, millions of people are going to be terrified. They're going to need guides. They're going to need people who've already seen behind the curtain and survived the seeing. That's you now. That's your purpose. Not to preach or convert or start a movement, but simply to be present with the knowing, to carry the frequency of remembrance, to help stabilize the transition. The shapeshifter stood, or rather its form flowed upward, and moved toward the door of the truck. Raymond found himself speaking, asking the question that burned in his chest. What about Jesus? What about God? Was that all part of the Matrix too? Was everything I believed as a kid just programming? The being paused, and when it turned back, its face was the face of every holy man and woman who'd ever lived, cycling through Buddha and Christ and Muhammad and Mary and Krishna and 1,000 others Raymond didn't have names for. The teachers were real, it said. The love they pointed toward was real. But the institutions built in their names, the religions that claimed exclusive access to truth, those were corrupted, absorbed into the matrix, used to keep people controlled. Jesus was a being who'd broken free of the moon's frequency, who'd remembered his true nature and tried to show others the way. His message was simple. The kingdom of heaven is within you. You are divine. You don't need priests or temples or intermediaries to access source. But that message was too dangerous to those who benefited from human slavery, so it was buried under layers of dogma and guilt and fear. Salvation isn't something you earn through belief or good behavior. It's something you remember. It's the recognition that you were never really lost, that hell was only ever the forgetting, and heaven was always just a shift in perception away. The shapeshifter stepped out of the truck and into the desert, and as its feet touched the sand, it began to dissolve, its form breaking apart into particles of light that drifted upward like reverse rain. One more thing, its voice echoed in Raymond's mind as the last traces of its physical presence faded. The moon is not your enemy. The beings who built it are not your enemy. They did what they did because they themselves had forgotten, because they were operating from their own programs, their own level of the matrix. This isn't a story of good versus evil. It's a story of consciousness remembering itself, layer by layer, frequency by frequency. Forgive them, forgive yourself, forgive the whole tragic, beautiful mistake of separation. That forgiveness is what breaks the frequency. That's the key I told you about. Love. Real love, not the romantic fantasy version. Love is a choice to see everything, even the darkest manipulations, as part of the learning, part of the journey back to wholeness. And then it was gone, and Raymond was alone in his truck on the side of a desert highway, with the moon hanging overhead like a question mark in the sky. Raymond sat there for what might have been minutes or hours, his sense of time completely disrupted. When he finally looked at his watch, only 5 minutes had passed since his truck had first started to slow down. 5 minutes. His entire understanding of reality had been dismantled and rebuilt in 5 minutes. The radio crackled back to life, picking up a country station out of Phoenix. Some song about lost love and whiskey that sounded absurdly mundane after what he'd just experienced. His engine turned over on the first try, running smooth and strong like it had never died. Raymond put the truck in gear and pulled back onto the highway, continuing toward Phoenix, continuing toward his delivery, because what else was he going to do? He had a job. He had responsibilities. The world didn't stop just because you'd been shown the invisible prison that contained it. But everything was different now. The highway looked different, felt different, like he was seeing it through multiple layers of reality at once. He could see the physical road, asphalt and paint and reflectors, but he could also see the energy flowing along it, the electromagnetic grid that covered the earth like a spider web, The ley lines and power points, and thin places where the veil between dimensions grew gossamer, and the moon god, the moon. Every time he looked at it, he could see what it really was. That massive piece of ancient technology broadcasting its frequencies, maintaining the illusion of separation, keeping billions of humans locked in cycles of suffering and unconscious repetition. Raymond drove through the rest of the night in a state of hyper-awareness, seeing things he'd never noticed before. The patterns of light from oncoming traffic that formed sacred geometry as they passed. The way radio towers pulsed with energy that interfaced with the moon's broadcast. The dark shapes that flickered at the edges of vision, beings that existed in frequency ranges just outside human perception, some of them feeding on the fear and pain generated by accidents and arguments, and all the small violences of life along the highway. He saw a man beating his wife in a rest stop parking lot and understood it wasn't just human cruelty, but the frequency of rage that the Matrix cultivated, that fed certain entities, that kept the cycle going. He wanted to intervene, but the shapeshifter's words echoed in his mind. Forgive, see it all as part of the journey. Your job isn't to fix the world, your job is to hold the frequency of remembrance. So he drove past, sending a silent prayer or intention or whatever you call it, when you push love in someone's direction without words. And he saw the man hesitate, saw something shift in his energy field, saw him lower his fist and step back, confused by his own sudden reluctance to follow through on the violence. That was the power the shapeshifter had talked about, not dramatic miracles, just presence, just consciousness holding space for a different choice. By the time Raymond reached Phoenix, the sun was coming up, painting the desert in shades of copper and gold. He made his delivery, unloading pallets of electronics into a warehouse where men with clipboards and forklifts moved with efficient boredom, completely unaware that the moon above them was a machine, that their thoughts weren't entirely their own, that they were players in a game they'd never agreed to play. Raymond wanted to grab them, shake them, shout the truth in their faces, but he knew they wouldn't hear it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The shapeshifter had been clear. You can't force awakening. You can only be ready when someone asks, when their own suffering has brought them to the edge of seeking, and they're finally willing to consider that everything they've been told might be a lie. Raymond signed the paperwork, accepted his receipt, and climbed back into his truck. He was supposed to pick up another load, head back to California, keep the cycle going. But he couldn't. Not yet. He needed time to process, to integrate, to figure out how to live as someone who knew the truth while surrounded by people who were still asleep. He drove to a truck stop, parked in the back row where the long haulers slept during their mandatory rest periods, and sat there with his hands on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. And then he cried, great heaving sobs that came from somewhere deeper than grief. Tears that felt like they were washing away years of lies, decades of programming, lifetimes of forgetting. When the tears finally stopped, Raymond felt lighter, clearer, like he'd purged something toxic from his system. He grabbed his phone, intending to call someone to share what had happened. But who would he call? His ex-wife who thought he was boring, his brother who'd become a born-again Christian and would probably try to exorcise him, his dispatcher who only cared about delivery times and fuel efficiency. There was no one. He'd lived his entire life in isolation, mistaking loneliness for independence, confusing emotional shutdown with strength. The Matrix loved that. Kept people separated, kept them from forming real connections, kept them competing instead of collaborating. That was part of the frequency too. Raymond put the phone down and closed his eyes, and in the darkness behind his eyelids, he saw the moon again, saw its machinery, saw the frequencies it broadcast, visualized as waves of color and sound. And he understood that he could feel those frequencies now, could sense them running through his nervous system like background radiation. The frequency of fear that made his chest tight, the frequency of scarcity that made him count every dollar and worry about retirement, the frequency of separation that made him feel fundamentally alone, even in crowds. They were still there, still operating, but now he could recognize them as external influences rather than his own authentic feelings. That was the first step toward freedom. Recognition, awareness, the ability to say, "This is the program running, not my true self." Raymond spent the next 3 days in that truck stop, barely eating, barely sleeping, just sitting with the knowledge, letting it settle into his bones. Other truckers came and went, some nodding at him in passing, others ignoring him completely, everyone locked in their own private worlds of thought and worry, and whatever small dramas made up their lives. Raymond watched them with new eyes, seeing the programs running, seeing how the Matrix kept them busy with trivial concerns so they'd never look up and question the bigger picture. Bills and mortgages and sick children and broken relationships and the endless grind of work that paid just enough to survive, but never enough to truly rest. The Matrix was brilliant in its simplicity. Keep people struggling, keep them exhausted, keep them too busy trying to meet basic needs to ever examine the nature of the needs themselves, to ever ask why life had to be this hard, why abundance seemed to flow to a select few, while the masses fought over scraps. On the third day, Raymond's phone rang. It was his dispatcher demanding to know why he'd missed 2 pickup appointments, why his truck was sitting idle in Phoenix when he should be halfway to Albuquerque. Raymond let the call go to voicemail. Then he turned the phone off. He was done. Done with the grinding wheel of work and payment and more work. Done pretending that the life he'd been living was meaningful just because it was familiar. The shapeshifter had woken him up, and now he couldn't go back to sleep. Raymond started driving, not toward any scheduled destination, but just driving, following impulses that felt like guidance, like some part of him that had access to information beyond his conscious mind was steering. He drove through Arizona, through New Mexico, through Texas, stopping at small towns and truck stops, diners and gas stations, anywhere people gathered. And everywhere he went, he started to see them. The others who'd woken up. They didn't wear signs or have identifying marks, but he could feel it in their energy, see it in their eyes. A waitress in Tucumcari who served him coffee and held his gaze a moment too long, recognition passing between them without words. An old man at a rest stop in Amarillo who sat down beside him on a bench and said, "You've seen it too, haven't you, the moon?" A young couple in Midland whose car had broken down, who Raymond helped fix even though he wasn't a mechanic, and who thanked him with tears in their eyes and said they'd been praying for a sign, for confirmation that they weren't crazy, that the things they'd been experiencing were real. Raymond didn't preach, didn't explain, just nodded, just held space, just let his presence communicate what words couldn't. "I see you, you're not alone, this is real," and somehow that was enough. The dream started after about a week on the road. Every time Raymond closed his eyes, he found himself in the same place, standing on what looked like the surface of the moon, surrounded by the crystalline technology the shapeshifter had shown him. But he wasn't alone. There were others there, hundreds or thousands of them, human-looking but translucent, like they were only partially present, like they were projecting consciousness to this place from their sleeping bodies somewhere on Earth. They stood in silent congregation, facing a figure at the center of their circle. And the figure shifted forms constantly, cycling through every possible shape, every possible configuration of matter and energy. The shapeshifter. It was teaching them, downloading information directly into their consciousness without language, showing them how the Matrix worked in exquisite detail, how to recognize the programs running in their own minds, how to begin the process of deprogramming, how to hold the frequency of liberation even while still physically incarnated in a world soaked in the frequencies of enslavement. "You are the ones who said yes," the shapeshifter told them in these dreams. You are the ones who volunteered to incarnate at this time, at this moment of transition, to help anchor new frequencies, to help birth a new way of being human. It will not be easy. You will be mocked and dismissed and called crazy. Your families will worry about you. Your friends will distance themselves, but you will find each other. You will form networks of support and recognition. You will be the midwives of a new earth. Raymond woke from these dreams feeling energized rather than rested, like he'd been working all night, like some part of him was actively engaged in rewiring reality while his body slept. He started keeping a journal, writing down everything he could remember, filling notebooks with diagrams and insights and questions. How far did the moon matrix extend? Were there similar systems on other planets, other species being farmed for consciousness the way humanity was farmed? What happened to souls who refused to enter the tunnel of light after death, who recognized the recycling mechanism and chose a different path? Could the matrix be dismantled or only transcended? Were the shapeshifters allies, or just another level of control? A more sophisticated trap for those who thought they'd escaped the obvious one? The questions multiplied faster than answers, and Raymond began to understand that maybe the point wasn't to have all the answers. Maybe the point was just to keep asking, to keep pushing against the boundaries of the known, to keep choosing consciousness over comfort. He started noticing synchronicities, meaningful coincidences that happened too frequently to be random. He'd think about needing information on a specific topic and then meet someone that same day who'd hand him a book about exactly that. He'd have a question and turn on the radio and hear someone discussing the same question on a talk show. Numbers started appearing everywhere, especially 1111 and 333 and other repeating digits that seemed to show up on clocks and license plates and receipts at moments when he was thinking about the Matrix. The shapeshifter had told him these were confirmations, winks from the universe, indications that he was on the right track, that he was moving in alignment with something larger than his individual will. But they could also be tests, the Matrix itself adapting, learning, trying to co-opt his awakening by making him feel special, chosen, important in a way that fed ego rather than dissolved it. The spiritual bypass was real and subtle. It was easy to think you transcended the game when you were just playing it at a higher level. Raymond drove to Roswell, drawn by the historical significance of the place, by the idea that maybe something about the famous UFO incident was connected to what he now knew. The town was a tourist trap, full of alien-themed restaurants and gift shops selling inflatable extraterrestrials and Area 51 bumper stickers. It should have felt cynical, exploitative, but instead Raymond sensed something underneath the kitsch, something genuine. The crash had been real. Beings from off-world had come down in 1947, and the government had recovered not just bodies, but technology, information, proof that humanity wasn't alone and never had been. But the truth had been buried, ridiculed, turned into entertainment so that anyone who tried to speak seriously about it would be dismissed as a crackpot. That was how the Matrix maintained itself. Not through direct suppression, though that happened too, but through mockery, through making the truth seem ridiculous so that people would self-censor, would stay silent rather than risk being laughed at. Raymond walked through the UFO museum, looking at the exhibits, reading the eyewitness accounts, and he felt a profound sadness for all the people who'd seen something real, something that shattered their worldview, and then spent the rest of their lives being called liars and attention seekers. At a diner that night, Raymond met a man named Frank, 78 years old, who'd been a boy in Roswell during the crash. Frank sat down at Raymond's table uninvited, something in his eyes suggesting he knew why Raymond was in town, that he recognized something in him. "You've got the look," Frank said, sipping weak coffee. "The look of someone who's seen past the veil. I had it too long time ago, but I got tired of carrying it, got tired of knowing things nobody else wanted to know." Man, he told Raymond about the night of the crash, how he and his father had driven out to the debris field before the military locked it down, how he'd touched pieces of metal that seemed to mend themselves, material that was impossibly light and impossibly strong, covered in symbols that looked like language, but not any language of Earth. They made us sign papers, Frank said. Threatened my dad, said if he ever talked about what we saw, bad things would happen to our family. So he stayed quiet. But he drank himself to death by the time I was 20, carrying that secret, knowing he'd seen proof of something bigger and not being allowed to share it. It ate him alive from the inside. That's what truth does when you can't speak it. It turns toxic. It becomes poison. Raymond asked Frank what he thought had been in that craft, who or what had crashed. Frank's eyes grew distant, looking at something beyond the walls of the diner, beyond the present moment. I think they were us, he said. Humans from the future, or from another timeline, coming back to try to wake us up, to give us technology that might help us break free. But we weren't ready. Our government took their gifts and weaponized them, used reverse-engineered technology to build better systems of control instead of liberation. That's the tragedy. Every time someone tries to help humanity evolve, we find a way to turn it into a tool for domination. Bree, he reached across the table and gripped Raymond's hand, his skin papery and cool, his grip surprisingly strong. Don't make my father's mistake, Frank said. Don't let the knowing destroy you. Speak it. Live it. Find others who can hear it. The silence is what kills you. The isolation is what the Matrix wants. They can't stop one person knowing the truth, but they can stop one person from telling 10, and those 10 telling 100, and those 100 telling 1,000. That's what they fear. That's why they work so hard to keep us separated and afraid. Raymond left Roswell the next morning, Frank's words echoing in his mind. He drove north toward Colorado, pulled by something he couldn't name, following roads that seemed to glow with a subtle luminescence when he looked at them with his new awareness. The landscapes he passed through felt alive in ways they never had before. The mountains and mesas and plains all radiating their own frequencies, all part of the Earth's electromagnetic system that the moon matrix was trying to suppress. The Earth wanted humanity to wake up, Raymond understood. The planet itself was a conscious entity, Gaia, Sophia, whatever name you wanted to give her, and she was working with cosmic forces to break the frequency prison that had been imposed on her children. The battle wasn't between good aliens and evil aliens, though that was part of it. The battle was between consciousness that wanted to expand and consciousness that wanted to control, between love that sought unity and fear that enforced separation. And every human being alive was a soldier in that battle, whether they knew it or not, whether they chose a side or tried to remain neutral. Raymond started having visions while he drove, his eyes open and focused on the road, but his awareness expanded into other dimensions. He saw the Earth as it had been before the moon matrix, when humans lived with full access to their consciousness, when telepathy and telekinesis and interdimensional travel were as natural as breathing, when death was understood as a doorway rather than an ending. He saw the arrival of the beings who built the moon, saw how they'd offered a deal to the rulers of ancient civilizations. Give us access to your people's consciousness, and we'll give you technology and power. And the rulers, drunk on their own importance, blinded by ego and the desire for control, had said yes. They'd sold out their own species for personal gain, for the ability to rule and be worshipped, never understanding that they too would become trapped in the system they were helping to create. The Matrix wasn't imposed purely from outside. It required collaboration from within. That was its genius. It made humans complicit in their own enslavement. The visions showed Raymond the key moments in history when the Matrix had been challenged, when groups of humans had remembered enough to start dismantling the frequency prison. Ancient mystery schools that taught methods for escaping reincarnation. Gnostic Christians who knew the demiurge, the false god of the material world, was not the true source. Cathars who were genocided for teaching that heaven and earth were reversed, that what humans called paradise was actually the prison. Native American traditions that maintained connection to earth consciousness and saw the moon as a trickster. Every tradition, every wisdom keeper, every prophet had been working on the same problem from different angles, trying to help humanity remember, trying to point toward the cage and say, look, see it, recognize it, free yourself. But the Matrix had adapted each time, had absorbed the challenges into itself, had turned rebellions into religions and revolutions into new forms of control. Raymond arrived in Boulder, Colorado, on a gray afternoon in late spring, rain falling soft and steady, the flatirons rising like ancient teeth against the clouded sky. He didn't know why he was here, only that the pull had been undeniable, that something in Boulder needed him, or he needed it. He found a motel on the outskirts of town, checked in, showered for the first time in days, and then walked into the downtown area, drawn toward the university campus. Students moved past him in clusters, young and energetic and completely unaware that they were being programmed as thoroughly as computers, their education designed not to free their minds, but to train them for roles in the matrix, to make them useful to the system while keeping them ignorant of the system's existence. Raymond felt a wave of compassion for them, for their innocence, for the lies they were still believing. They would learn eventually. The awakening was accelerating. Soon the choice would be forced on everyone. See the cage or deny it, step into consciousness or retreat deeper into sleep. He found himself at a metaphysical bookstore, the kind of place that sold crystals and tarot cards and books about chakras and past lives. Under normal circumstances, Raymond would have dismissed it all as New Age nonsense, feel-good spirituality for people who wanted to think they were enlightened without actually changing anything about their lives. But now he understood that even in the commercialized spirituality, even in the diluted and misinterpreted teachings, there were seeds of truth. People who came to stores like this were seeking, even if they didn't know what they were seeking, even if they were looking in the wrong places. They were trying to fill a void that the Matrix had created, trying to reconnect with something the frequency prison had disconnected them from. Raymond browsed the shelves, touching book spines, feeling for resonance. And then a book fell off a high shelf, landed at his feet with a thud. He picked it up. The cover showed the moon in all its false glory, and the title read, "The Moon Matrix and the Frequency of Enslavement," by someone named D.I. Raymond's hands trembled as he opened it. The author's name was clearly a pseudonym, a reference to David Icke, whose theories about the moon had once seemed insane to Raymond, but now seemed prescient. The book laid out everything the shapeshifter had shown him, everything he'd been integrating in the weeks since his encounter. It talked about Saturn's role as a frequency amplifier, about the black cube symbolism found in religions around the world, about the hexagonal storm at Saturn's North Pole that broadcast frequencies the moon then reflected and amplified down to Earth. It talked about the archons, interdimensional entities that fed on human suffering, that worked with the moon technology to keep humanity producing the emotional energy they consumed. It talked about the tunnel of light, the reincarnation trap, the memory wipe, all of it confirming what Raymond had been shown. He bought the book and 3 others like it, authors who were speaking the truth even if they were being marginalized and mocked by mainstream science and media. Back at his motel, Raymond read through the night, underlining passages, making notes, his mind expanding with each page. One book talked about how certain individuals incarnated with a specific mission to wake others up, how they were coded at the soul level to resist the Matrix's programming, how they would spend their early lives feeling like misfits and outcasts because they couldn't fully buy into the lies everyone else accepted as normal. Raymond recognized himself in those descriptions. He'd always felt slightly off, slightly disconnected, like he was watching the world through glass instead of participating in it. He'd thought it was a character flaw, evidence that he was broken somehow, but maybe it had been protection. Maybe his soul had known he needed to maintain distance so that when the moment came to wake up fully, he wouldn't be so invested in the illusion that he'd refuse to let it go. As dawn broke over Boulder, Raymond finished the last book and sat in silence, letting everything settle. He understood now that he wasn't unique. There were thousands, maybe millions of people around the world having similar experiences, receiving similar downloads, being prepared for the same transition. The shapeshifter had told him this, but reading it confirmed by multiple sources, knowing he was part of a larger movement of consciousness, filled him with something he hadn't felt in years: hope. Not the desperate hope that clings to specific outcomes, but the deep hope that trusts in process, that knows something meaningful is unfolding even when the details are unclear. The Matrix was failing. The frequencies were breaking down. The moon technology was becoming obsolete. And humanity was on the cusp of the greatest awakening in its history. The moment when the veil would lift completely and everyone would see at once what had been done to them, what they truly were underneath the programming. It would be chaotic. It would be terrifying for those still deeply invested in the illusion, but it would also be magnificent. It would be the birth that follows labor, the emergence that follows chrysalis. Raymond spent 2 weeks in Boulder, attending talks and workshops, meeting others on the path, comparing notes and experiences. He met a woman named Sarah, who channeled information from collectives of beings working to support humanity's awakening. He met a former physicist who'd been ostracized from academia for publishing papers about consciousness affecting quantum reality. He met a healer who'd learned to see and manipulate the frequency fields around human bodies, who showed Raymond that he too had this ability, that everyone did if they learned to look in the right way. They practiced together, sitting in meditation, expanding their awareness, feeling into the electromagnetic grid that covered the earth, finding the nodes of resistance where the matrix signal was strongest, and then consciously choosing to broadcast a different frequency. Love instead of fear, unity instead of separation, abundance instead of scarcity. It was subtle work, invisible to anyone not tuned into these levels of reality, but it was real. Raymond could feel the shifts, could sense ripples spreading out from their group, touching other people nearby, giving them brief moments of clarity, brief windows where they could choose to wake up if they were ready. One night, at a gathering in someone's living room, about 20 people sitting in a circle, attempting a group meditation to send healing frequencies to the earth, Raymond felt the shapeshifter return. It didn't manifest physically this time. It simply appeared in his awareness, a presence in his mind that was distinct from his own thoughts. "You are doing well," it communicated. "You are learning to work with the frequencies instead of being controlled by them. This is the work. This is what it means to live awake in a sleeping world. You cannot force others to wake up, but you can hold a frequency that makes waking up easier for those who are ready. You can be a tuning fork that others can resonate with. That is your gift. That is your purpose." Raymond asked silently if he would see the shapeshifter in physical form again, and he felt what might have been amusement in the response. "I am always with you," it said. "I am with all of you. We do not exist in your linear time or three-dimensional space. We are in the spaces between. We are the consciousness that dreams you into being and the wisdom that remembers what you forget. When you close your eyes and find stillness, we are there. When you quiet your mind and listen, you hear us. The separation you experience is part of the illusion. In truth, there is no you and us. There is only consciousness exploring itself, playing all the roles, learning all the lessons, slowly remembering that it was never really divided. The meditation ended and people opened their eyes, blinking like they were coming back from a long journey. Several people reported similar experiences, feeling presences, receiving messages, touching something vast and loving that existed beyond the frequency of the matrix. They talked late into the night, sharing insights, building on each other's understanding, creating a tapestry of truth from many threads. Raymond understood that this was how the new world would be built, not through top-down organization or charismatic leaders, but through organic networks of people who recognized each other, who trusted the guidance of their own expanded awareness, who were willing to question everything and hold certainty lightly. The revolution would not be televised because it was happening in consciousness itself, in the interior spaces where the matrix had no cameras, where control was impossible because authentic free will was finally being reclaimed. Before Raymond left Boulder, Sarah pulled him aside and gave him a crystal, a piece of clear quartz about the size of his thumb. "This has been programmed," she said. "With your frequency, your purpose, carry it with you. When you doubt yourself, when you wonder if any of this is real, hold it and remember, you are a lighthouse. Your job is just to shine. Let others find their own way to your light if they need it." Raymond pocketed the crystal and hugged her. This woman he'd known for 2 weeks, but felt connected to in a way that transcended time, like they'd done this work together in many lifetimes. Like they were part of a soul group that incarnated again and again to help guide humanity through its darkest passages and into its brightest possibilities. Raymond hit the road again, continuing to follow impulses, continuing to trust the guidance that came from somewhere beyond his rational mind. He drove through Wyoming, through Montana, through Idaho, stopping wherever he felt called to stop, meeting whoever showed up to meet him. At a truck stop in Bozeman, he met a long-haul trucker named Marcus who'd been having the same dreams, who'd been shown the moon matrix in a vision while driving through a blizzard. They sat in Marcus's cab and compared experiences, laughing at the synchronicities, marveling at how the universe was orchestrating connections, bringing people together who needed to find each other. Marcus had been thinking about quitting, about abandoning the road, because he couldn't stomach being part of the system anymore, couldn't stomach hauling goods for corporations that were knowingly poisoning people and planet for profit. But talking to Raymond gave him a different perspective. "Maybe being a trucker is perfect," Raymond said. "We're always moving, always covering ground, always in contact with people in every state. We're like mobile nodes in a network, carrying frequencies from place to place, linking isolated pockets of awakening into a larger web. The Matrix wants us stationary, wants us stuck in one place, one job, one identity. But we're fluid. We're Ha.